Welcome to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. In each show, we share the latest about regulations and things you need to know, plus upcoming conferences and fests, along with interviews with the movers and shakers in this fabulous vape space. Are you looking to get into this ever-expanding marketplace? Do you want to master this industry? Listen up as Norm Bauer, the Vape Mentor, shares it all. And here's your host, Norm Bauer.
Hello and welcome to Vape Radio, the voice of vaping, and this is show number 68, our second show of 2016. I'm Norm Bauer with VapeMentors, and today's show is sponsored by Your E-Liquids. Are you a retail shop without your own house line? Do you already have your own liquids but lack consistency or confidence that they're offering you a product that you can stand behind? Your E-Liquids offers you a turnkey 8-week program to develop your own line and includes help with marketing, branding, and expansion into a wholesale channel if you wish. For information, just contact me here at Vape Radio. That's Norm at VapeMentors.com. In our last show, number 67, we offered part one of our two-part overview of what happened in Washington, D.C. at the OMB hearings in December 2015. Today, we're actually sharing two different perspectives of the events that unfolded. One is from the retail shop owner of Freedom Vapes in Montana. Ron and Deanna Marshall have an amazing story of how they got into the business and how they got involved in advocacy, not by choice, but because of necessity. The other perspective is at the other end of the spectrum, and that's a conversation with Esteemed Chowdhury with Keller & Heckman Law Firm in Washington, D.C., who you may recall led our FDA webinar series a few months ago. Esteemed probably has more insight on the events than anyone in the country, as you will hear in just a few minutes. We're going to start with the Marshall story, and stick around as we welcome Esteemed in just a short while. You might expect that of all the people who went back to Washington to meet with the OMB, most of them were what you would call the major players. And you know what? You'd be right. But what was really refreshing is that the OMB invited anyone and everyone that had something to share into Washington, D.C. to testify. The Five Ponds was there, the Molecule was there, the Vapor Sharks were there. A lot of the big players, of course, were the ones I met, or actually one of the couples I met. And they have two small vape shops up in Montana. And their story is an amazing, which I'm going to share another time. I'm going to profile them, but really I want to talk about what their motivation was to go to Washington, how they got involved in advocacy, and whether or not they got something out of it. So, Ron and Deanna, welcome to Vape Radio.
Hey, Norm.
Hi, Norm.
So first off, tell us just a little bit about your background. Neither one of you are entrepreneurs or were entrepreneurs. You started your vape shop because there was a need. So give us just a real quick overview about when you started shop number one, when you started shop number two, and specifically, why in the world did you decide that you wanted to get involved with politics?
Well, I'll get to the politics part first off. Well, Deanna got really sick and could not smoke. We were 2.5 pack day smokers. She couldn't smoke, and then we started looking at the vaping end of things, and we started out with, the V2s and the blue e-cigs, and they were all right, but it wasn't enough. She found the first versions with the CE4 clearizers online, got those in, and of course everything was over the internet. There were no brick and mortar stores here in Montana in our valley, and we had to deal with what we could get on the internet, and it worked. Both of us quit smoking within about a week to 2 weeks, became vapors, and then the problem started where ordering online wasn't exactly, you didn't get what you were paying for. The flavors weren't what they were advertised to be. So we decided that, hey, we could do this better, and we decided to open our own shop. And we opened in March 2014 out in Belmont, square foot shop. The majority of it pretty much being inventory, a back room, slab, and it was just her for quite a while. And then business picked up over time. And I was a truck driver working for the oil fields, and came off the road eventually, and then we had to hire an employee, and we hired her son and come over here to Bozeman and open the store. And so in June of this year, we did that. Kind of backtracking a little bit, in January, politics found us. There was a bill in the Senate here in Montana that they wanted to restrict the age of purchase to 18 and above, which we didn't have a problem with. The problem is they wanted to put us in with tobacco. So the vape shops followed up and testified at the Senate committee, and they were receptive. We had a senator that was on the committee whose son quit smoking because of vaping, and she became our ally. And she helped us, rewrite the bill to separate us from tobacco. So vaping in Montana is considered an alternative nicotine product, not a tobacco product. Then we had to fight again. Big Tobacco wanted us to have a tobacco license and came up with the vape license idea. So we're pretty much separated, from tobacco here. That was our first run-in with politics.
Well, I'm going to jump in a moment. So first off, that is an amazing success story, and kudos to you for, one, taking it upon yourself to provide something that was lacking, but more importantly is that the majority of people, that politics is easy to get involved with. Most people would have just complained and they would have bitched about it, where you actually went to the Senate, you went to your governor, and you actually made a difference. And so you saw that this was going to seriously curtail or impact your business. That is correct, yes?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
So as we move forward into the OMB controversy, obviously you were watching the deeming regulations and you were watching for the new set that just came out in October. And it just so happens, for those of you who are listening, that's when I met these lovely folks over here in California. They came out to a vaping event and they were able to listen to, Cynthia Cabrera from Safada and Gregory Connolly from AVA. And so they understand politics and they aren't just sitting on the sidelines. So when you found out the OMB was inviting people to come in, was it kind of like an instant decision? Was, hell yeah, we got to go? Or did you have to waver back and forth to wonder, was it going to mean anything?
No, we had to go. We have to save our business.
Yeah, we got on there, emailed with the OMB to schedule a date, got with Cynthia Cabrera. Safada put out an excellent outline of what to do and how to contact the OMB. We understood the OMB wanted to hear more numbers than, the stories. So you had to hit them with the hard facts and the numbers. Yeah, I'll shut down
Well, as a matter of
businesses.
Fact, you're a great example of someone who pretty much you went all in. You used probably a lot of your life savings, and if your businesses were closed, you probably don't have a plan B, just like a lot of history that I call. So you got your appointment with OMB and you went back there. So the question is that did you experience what you thought you were going to experience, and do you feel that your voice was heard? Because you were in a room with about 25 other people, whereas some people got one-on-one. So you were able to hear the testimony of several other companies. So what was it you shared with them? Do you feel it made an impact?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The one thing, it wasn't what I expected coming out of Senate and House committees. I expected it a little more formal. They were a little more relaxed. They gave a chance for everyone to speak. And with that, it was good because everybody there hit the high points, but they each took one of those points and kind of hammered it home. Yeah. When we got up there, it was our turn to talk. Basically what I did was told them about SB 66, what we had done here in the state. And then we confronted them also with the regulations. Had they read them? They were pretty receptive to that. A lot of people that, Montana had that law. Well, we made them aware of it. So the OMB ended up coming. They were very polite. But it was neat because we could interact with others up there and get an idea of who's behind the name. And I think our voice was heard.
That's awesome. So there's two other things I want to talk about. And I want to talk about, one, the fact that while you were back there, you didn't just fly in, do your testimony, and leave. You actually stayed several extra days, and you met with senators and congressmen from your particular state of Montana there in D.C. So I want to touch on that very briefly. And I also wanted to talk about the Montana Quit line, because I was not familiar with the Montana Quit line, but over dinner, Ron and Deanna shared with me some of the propaganda that is put together by this organization called the Montana Quit Line, and we're going to share the entire story for another time. But very briefly, tell us about the Montana Quit Line, and also tell us about some of the politicians there in D.C.
Well, I'll pick it up from after the OMB. We went to the Capitol on Wednesday morning to the Hart Senate building. We met with one of the only congressmen we have here in the state of Montana, Representative Zinke. We were emailing, trying to get them, in and trying to get him to co-sponsor HR 2058. After meeting with him and having a sit-down, we were able to have him do that. We also met with both of our senators, Senator Tester and Senator Daines, who both happened to be on the committee that was overseeing the spending bill. It turns out that Senator Tester's brother and son both vape, so very receptive to that, and also the fact that if the rules went through, there would be lost revenue for the state. Politicians always love talking money. The senator sit down with one of his staffers to discuss, what our plays were, and at that time we were told that it would probably not be, the grandfather date probably would not be included on the spending bill because there's very few riders that they allow on those bills. But we're working on something else with that also.
And that turned out to be true, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they end up not changing the grandfather date. The jury's still out. There's still some fight left in this tiger, so we'll have to see what happens. So very briefly, share with us, Ron, the Montana quit line about what they've done and what you're trying to do to overcome them.
Okay, yeah, the Montana quit line. There was an article that one of the reporters had done here in the newspaper that was very, I want to say, fair and balanced. One of our customers, she quit smoking, weaned herself off, quit vaping, and she came in and did a very in-depth report. Human Services Department. She talked to people at the high schools, and she talked to a professor out of Tennessee at one of the universities there who's been doing a lot of studies on e-cigarettes. So after that, the Montana quit line, and everybody called the newspaper wanting to run a counter, and they were turned down. Well, they turned right around, and all of a sudden these commercials on TV, very catchy jingle, showed would have been the housewife back in the 50s in the kitchen with a vape pen in an ashtray saying that it's safe, there's acetone, there's formaldehyde, there's copper, tin, lead, just, the lies, the lie.
And calling us big tobacco, hasn't changed their ways.
Yeah, they're associating us with big tobacco.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in Montana, we're not big tobacco, nor are we a tobacco product by law.
Yes. That's the irony of it, is that your capital to be considered a alternative, yet this Montana quit line is actually circumventing that. So what they're doing is very bad. And again, for those of you who are listening throughout the rest of the country and throughout the rest of the world, this is not an isolated case. Where I am in California, we have similar type of, anti-vaping commercials that come on, funded by various constituents. And so the reality of it is, guys, is that this is the war that you can win. But if you see lies, if you see propaganda, if you see libel and slander that's put into the media, either in written or in audio form, by all means, you need to get to the root of it. And you don't necessarily have to go to Washington to meet with your congressman, but there are things that we can do. And what I'm seeing in the industry is I'm seeing a lot more pushback from the industry, whereas people who maybe were sitting on the sidelines and maybe they were a little bit not my fight, they're now getting into the fight because they realize that the reality is hitting home, that this industry could be seriously curtailed by some of these regulations that are coming on. Well, listen, Ron and Deanna, thank you so much for sharing your story. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, their story is much, much deeper than this, how they got started and where they are right now. We're going to profile them in a successive shows. But for right now, our series of people who have been to the OMB, because you're never going to hear this anyplace else. I'm talking with the people who have been there, getting their feedback so we can see where we need to fill in the gaps, where we need to fill in the holes so that we continue this fight against the FDA. And let's hope that our voices are heard. So Ron and Deanna, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to catching you next time.
Thank you, Norm.
Thanks, Norm.
As you may agree, the Marshalls have an amazing story. They are a true mom and pop shop if ever there was one, and they're getting involved, which we all have to do, whether we want to or not. At the other end, we also have our favorite vaping legal expert, Azim Chowdhury. He sat with me at the OMB while I did my presentation on the effect of the proposed regulations. It was a fairly brief affair, less than 30 minutes, and I spoke on the potential job losses of tens of thousands of people to many times that. Azim will cover not just witness, but also his opinion of the potential future scenarios. Today we're talking to one of our favorite people in the vaping industry. His name is Azim Chowdhury. He is with Keller and Heckman. They are a law firm back in Washington, D.C. And our relationship with Azim goes back actually quite some time. He's been an instructor in our VapeU program, and he's also been involved with several other things that we've done, including our FDA workshop, our webinar series back in November and December. But here specifically, we're talking about what exactly happened in Washington. So for those of you who may not know or weren't maybe listening to part one, the Office of Management and Budget got the regulations from the FDA, and then they went through a process which Azim's going to explain. I was invited to go back, and Azim actually stood there by me. So with that as a little bit of a preview, Azim Chideri, welcome to Vape Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell everyone who might not be familiar with you a little bit about what you and Keller and Heckman do so we can kind of set a little bit of a background.
Sure. I am an attorney, a partner here at Keller and Heckman. I'm based in Washington, D.C. Keller and Heckman, just so you know, we're a global firm. We're a mid-sized firm, but we have offices around the world in San Francisco, Brussels, Paris, and Shanghai. And I'm here in our D.C. headquarters. And our primary practice, or my primary practice, is an FDA regulatory practice. And within that, I focus on e-vapor products, both e-liquid and devices. And I have been personally involved at, developing this practice almost since the beginning of the industry here in the U.S. since 2009. When I first started, writing articles about how these products could potentially be regulated by FDA and, government. And so I've been on the ground floor for many years and, developed a little bit of an expertise on the legal issues surrounding these products.
Well, I think you're being modest. I think it goes beyond a little bit of an expertise. I mean, there's only a few people that I know that have the knowledge that you have, and you probably have been involved with it longer than others. So were you one of the first people who kind of said the sky is falling, that the FDA may in fact start interfering, or were other people maybe aware of what the FDA's involvement might be several years ago?
Well, when these products first started, coming on to the U.S. market, mostly from China, the early Ciga-like models, no one really quite knew what to do with them. And I remember my first experience walking around in a mall here in Northern Virginia and coming across a kiosk where they were selling, these Ciga-like products. And, I wasn't a smoker. I never smoked, but I immediately saw these products and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of potential here, both good and possibly some negative. And, I immediately started researching these products as an attorney, and I was at the time doing FDA work and medical device work. It was pretty clear that, these were not going to be simply unregulated for very long. And, FDA first came out and took the position that these were going to be unapproved drug devices, and that eventually switched its positions to consider them tobacco products, as you may have remembered from our previous webinars. But yeah, so I have been, following this from the very beginning and, through all the court battles, and we are gearing up for the next one now.
All right, so let's talk about what that battle might look like. So back in April of 14, the FDA came out with what was then called the deeming regs, which was a behemoth of a document. There was conjecture about when they would come out with their final regs, and it was always next month. Well, it finally did happen, and so they did finally come out with their new regulations back in October of 2015. And you, of course, went through them literally line item by line item, and then you watched that document as it went to the OMB. So again, as a little bit of a background, tell us what the documents. Well, on second thought, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So why don't we just talk about the hearing? We could spend an hour on this conversation, which for those of you who might be listening, we actually did spend an hour with Azim a few months ago when we did a free webinar, which obviously we can give you access to. But what is your overall impression, Azim, of the documents that went from the FDA to the OMB? And what is your overall impression of, did the FDA take it seriously about how significant these hearings were, or were they really just kind of doing business as usual? What's your sense of their level of emotional involvement with these particular regulations?
Sure, that's a good question. And just to clarify a little bit, in April 2014, FDA proposed the deeming regulation. And, after a few months of public comment, they shut off comments, and we haven't seen anything official from FDA since then. Since August of 2014. We know that in October of last year, 2015, FDA sent their final version of the deeming regulation to OMB for review, which is the final step in the process of publishing regulation. OMB has to review it and approve it. So we know that the rule, FDA's version of the rule, final version, went to OMB in October. We know slightly part of what was in that rule because part of that rule was leaked, and that typically does not happen. Trade association called Tobacco got a hold of a document of, allegedly FDA's final version of the rule and its corresponding guidance document for pre-market applications. I don't want to, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, as you just mentioned. That we could spend a couple hours talking about that very detailed guidance document, and we got a good idea of where FDA was headed, which does not appear to be very much different from what they proposed. And so what was proposed, which is, still, the bulk of what we have to go on, and that was the subject of the OMB discussions, which I can talk about.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, are the leaked documents, do we believe these to be correct and accurate documents, or do we not have a final decision on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no final decision on that. I mean, again, what was leaked was a table of contents of the final rule and the draft guidance document. And so FDA often publishes, along with regulations, which have to go through this long notice and comment process. They publish guidance documents to help the industry understand how to interpret those regulations. So we got a glimpse of what the regulations look like because we saw what the draft guidance looks like, which, we can sort of, we don't have the full equation, but we definitely have a big chunk of it. But again, it's just a draft guidance. I can tell you what I think about where I think OMB is going to go and whether or not they're going to end up changing a lot of it. But to answer your question is no, we don't have anything final from OMB yet, and we probably won't until the final rule is finally officially published.
Okay. So when you and I met back in D.C., you had been to, I believe, 5 hearings prior to me. So collectively, and by the way, are these hearings still going on here in the first week of January 2016, or are they now concluded?
Well, I don't know. OMB has only announced on their website, they've only listed the meetings that they've held through December 15th. And I've been to a couple of meetings since that time, back at the end of December. My understanding is that they were still accepting meeting requests. So it may not be too late to get a meeting with OMB now if you still request one. Although there's no guarantee that OMB will meet with you if they've already finalized the rule. To answer your first question, along with VapeMentors and you, Norm, I attended a total of 8 other meetings, so a total of 9 meetings at OMB. Most of them were individual meetings, about half an hour long with the individual companies. I was attending as an attorney on behalf of my clients. So I got to attend a number of meetings and got to see a large part of what OMB was seeing. But I think there were over 30 or potentially more meetings that were held over the course of, the months of November and December.
Okay, so you're probably the number one, I'm going to call you expert in quotation marks as far as watching this transition or this process of different people coming in. So from the early ones that you started attending to the later ones, did you see any change in the questions that came up, or were there very many questions raised, or was pretty much the ones at the beginning were almost the same as the ones at the ends, or did you see any progress as far as maybe some type of light bulb that might have gone over at OMB that said, this is a serious issue and maybe we shouldn't just, bypass it, but actually do some really deep diving into it?
Right. That's a good question. And it's hard to say how OMB interpreted these meetings because from their point of view, these are listening sessions. So they're there to absorb information that you choose to present to them. And if they have a question that is, a clarifying question that comes up from your presentation, then they'll ask it. But as you remember from our meeting, the first thing that they say when they walk in is, we are here to discuss the deeming reg. Because the rule is pending, we are not allowed to comment on the rule itself or discuss the rule itself because it's, pending before them. And so they never, in any of the meetings I attended, they never asked a, ton of questions. I definitely, attended meetings where they asked more than others. It sort of depended on the nature of the presentation, the types of questions that were raised. I did see it appeared to me, again, I can't say this conclusively, but it appeared to me that, as we moved into December and late December, that the OMB staffers who were attending most of these meetings appeared to be becoming more knowledgeable. They asking less questions, or their questions became more specific and less sort of amateurish. Maybe that's not a good word, but became more advanced in their understanding, I think, of products in the industry and the impact it's going to have on the consumers and the economy as the meetings progressed, over the course of 6 or 7 weeks.
Well, they came from a position of naivety, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. The truth is that we here in the industry, we understand it a lot better than they do because, again, this is not their world. Their world is overseeing the president's budget. So what are your thoughts as far as, I'm going to make some assumptions here, which may or may not be accurate, but let's just say for the sake of discussion here that the hearings are for the most part over. And now they collectively get their thoughts together and maybe they put together a report. And then what is the process from this point? Do they send it back to the FDA with their feedback? Or is it really just something that goes to some other entity besides back to the FDA?
Well, it's going to go back to the FDA. So right now, presumably OMB is, I agree, pretty much compared with their industry meetings. And what they should be doing now is coming to their conclusions about what aspects of the deeming regulation need to be modified. Because, what we hope is that they learn that what's been proposed will drastically impact the industry, $3.5 billion industry, including thousands of small businesses and thousands upon thousands of individual jobs, and that the public health impact that is alleged that these products will have is not as adverse as maybe some in the FDA or in the public health community would like you to believe. And so what we hope is happening at OMB now is a weighing of these costs and benefits, and ultimately they will go back to FDA with their suggested recommendations on what needs to be changed, on what aspects of the deeming reg, are unnecessary, and ways that FDA can improve it and actually regulate based on science.
And one of the things that we spoke about when you did your FDA webinar is that there were many things in these regulations that were not addressed, including guidelines for liquid manufacture, sampling, and the grandfather date of February of 2009. So is the FDA, I'm going to say, obligated to take this information into account, or can they basically say, thank you very much for all your feedback, but we're going to continue to move forward as planned? Is there any type of intermediary or mediation that maybe has some involvement or control here?
Right, and you brought up a very good point. What was proposed in the deeming reg was not any type of actual regulation, any type of standards or clean room standards or ingredient purity or quality safety standards. None of that was proposed. All that was proposed was we are going to call e-cigarettes and liquid that contain nicotine tobacco products, and we're going to subject them to the Tobacco Control Act, which does not have those specific things in there yet. There are certain things in there, such as pre-market authorization, which would retroactively apply to these products. But no actual regulation, no actual standards were proposed. And so FDA can't just say, thanks for your suggestion, OMB, we're not going to accept it. The two agencies have to come to an agreement. And that's what we saw with the proposed version back in April 2014. Before we even saw the April 2014 proposed deeming reg, OMB reviewed that, before FDA published it. So they have to come to an agreement before the final version can be published. Now, my concern is, while I do believe OMB took this feedback and listened to it, and they heard, all the stories from the small companies and the large companies, the financial impact across the board. They heard stories about the public health impact and, the individual impact on consumers. While they heard all those, they gathered all that data, my concern is that, is it going to be enough for them to make real substantial changes to the deeming reg that would actually impact? And what I mean by that is it going to be enough for them to go back to FDA and say, you have to change the grandfather date, or, you have to come up with a less onerous pre-market pathway for these products, or both? And my fear is that despite all of these good, presentations from the industry, that there's just not enough data for OMB to get FDA to change, those two big items.
Wow. And you know what? I'm tending to agree with you. As much as we would like certain things to happen, including some modicum of logic and common sense, we don't necessarily know. So let's talk about the three people who might be listening to this radio show right now. We have brick and mortar locations, we have e-liquid manufacturers or distributors, and then we have the average consumer. So let's just say that if everything goes down the way the FDA proposed it, if you were a brick and mortar shop right now, Azim, is there anything they should be doing to plan for what's going to happen? And then I'm going to pose that same question to, is there anything an e-liquid company should do? And lastly, what about from the consumer standpoint? Will the consumer have a much, much smaller selection of products to choose from? So that's kind of the direction I'm going here. So let's talk with the brick and mortar location. So what, if anything, should they be doing right now to prepare for 2016? Because I wrote an article for Vape Magazine called 2016 Industry Survival Guide. And I'm talking about some of the things that people should do as a way of good business practices and being ahead of the curve rather than trying to be reactive. So if you were a brick and mortar company or shop right now, what, if anything, should they be doing, Azim?
Well, the first thing you should know if you're a brick and mortar company or a vape shop, you should know that if you are making your own liquid, if you're mixing or even labeling your own liquid, you would be considered, once the rule is effective, a tobacco product manufacturer. And you would be subject to all the same requirements that would apply to the major e-liquid companies and the tobacco companies, okay, which would mean pre-market authorization for all your products, complying with good manufacturing practices that when they come out eventually, all of the ingredient and product disclosures, registering your facility, which would be your vape shop, wherever you're manufacturing or bottling the liquid. So depending on if you are making your own liquid or mixing, versus just retailing, there's a big difference. And so that's the first thing you need to know. That's a risk that you need to be willing to take as a manufacturer. So that's my first response. If you're simply retailing, meaning if you're selling other branded juice or liquid from some bigger players or other, distributors, then you're going to be less directly impacted by the federal regulations. You're going to be more focused on complying with any local and state retailing, licensing and permitting requirements, things of that nature. FDA, for the most part, will not be regulating you except for, ensuring that you are not making or mixing bottling liquids, as well as ensuring that you're not selling to minors under the age of 18 or doing any other sort of false advertising of your products. Those types of big things will be handled by FDA. But for a manufacturer of the product, any liquid that's being mixed or bottled, you would be considered an FDA-regulated manufacturer.
And that's pretty significant because now you're thrown into the same deep water that a lot of the larger tobacco companies are being exposed to. So from the consumer standpoint, are they going to notice anything different out there? Are they going to have access to a larger or a much, much smaller number of products available just because of people bailing on the marketplace? Do you have any, and this is an opinion only thing, of course, because no one really knows, but if you were a consumer, how do you think this is going to impact you?
I think it will definitely have an impact on consumer choice and product availability. The biggest provisions of the deeming regulation, like the pre-market application, even if the rule becomes effective and as it was drafted without any changes to the grandfather date, the first PMTAs would not be due for a couple of years. So you may not see an immediate shift in the market, but I think a lot of companies are going to look and say, well, I'm going to either get out of this industry now before I become regulated, and so I'm gonna jump ship, or they're going to join forces with other bigger companies. And so you are going to see, regardless of over the next couple of years, a large reduction in the number of products available, for you to choose from.
Agreed. Well, I think that you will agree, as most people who are listening right now will agree, that this is an ever-evolving story. It does not have a conclusion yet, and it probably won't for the very foreseeable future. My opinion has been, which I've shared, is that the industry is not going to go away. There will be some form of vaping out there. There will be some brick and mortar shops and e-liquid companies out there, but it's definitely going to be curtailed down. It's going to be a matter of survival of the fittest, and it's going to be a changing and very dynamic marketplace for the next couple of years. So, Azim, I want to thank you on behalf of Vape Radio and myself and VapeMentors for sharing all this insight. And as I said, this is going to be an ever-evolving process, and so we would love to invite you back as things happen, probably in another couple of months, or if anything happens prior to that. We would love to be able to tap into your wisdom and your insight and keep everyone involved about what's going on, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. And just a quick final plug. Once the rule comes out, we are forming a coalition of e-vapor companies that are prepared to challenge the rule in court. You can find out more about the coalition at the r2bsmokefree.org. It's right2bsmokefree.org. And you can find out more about that and our challenge there.
All right, so I don't want to just leave it at that. So tell us more a little bit about this. Are you doing a class action suit? Are you doing it? Well, now I'm intrigued because I believe that we need to be proactive rather than reactive. So I'm all for going to the firing line. So are you putting together a class action suit of some sort?
So let me tell you what's happening right now. We have formed a coalition of e-liquid companies and, also e-vapor device companies if they're interested. It's called the Right to Be Smoke-Free Coalition. Okay, and the website, I'll mention it again, www.r2, the number 2, besmokefree.org. And you'll see, if you go to that website link right now, you'll see that what we're currently doing, we're currently involved in a legal challenge of the Indiana law, which was passed last year, which basically bans open system e-liquids in that state starting in July, because it's virtually impossible for e-liquid companies to comply with this very onerous Indiana-specific law for a variety of reasons. And so we have formed this coalition. We're in the process of right now challenging that law. So any companies that do business in Indiana, please feel free to reach out to me about joining that coalition and the effort there. But the RTB Smoke Free Coalition is going to be the vehicle beyond Indiana that we use to challenge FDA, to challenge, for example, if the grandfather date is not changed in the final rule, or, the way the FDA is treating these products as tobacco products. There are legal arguments we can make that we will, take to court if FDA and OMB do not change it through this regulatory process. And once that final rule comes out, we are going to, be prepared to file that lawsuit. It won't be a class action lawsuit, but again, it'll be on behalf of the coalition. And so anyone can join the coalition. Company in the industry can join the coalition. And so this needs to be an industry-wide effort. This is not going to be another Soterra case where one company, takes on, FDA. This has to be an industry-wide effort, so that no one is paying for the bulk of the bill, that everyone is sharing in the cost, because this impacts everyone. Even if you're competing now in the marketplace, you are still in the same industry and you need to have the same voice and be heard. And so that's my quick, 2-minute pitch of the coalition. What might make sense at some point, Norm, is to have a call specifically about the coalition and hopefully our victory in Indiana, which we hope to have in the next couple months.
Well, I wish you great success in Indiana. And for those of you who might be listening in the state of Indiana, I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to share. So I got a call a few days ago from one of my shops in Indiana. One of the state excise associations or regulatory agencies came in and threatened to close them because they did not have a tobacco seller's license. And I was shocked at that because this has a lot to do with the law that goes into effect on July 1. And I told them that I did not believe that they were required to have a tobacco seller's license already. But without going into all the detail, they actually are going out and applying for that. Is this related to the new law in Indiana that's not even supposed to take effect for another 6 months?
Yes, I believe so. The law in Indiana impacts both retailers, distributors, and manufacturers. And so there are different requirements that they have imposed. The biggest hurdle right now is for the manufacturers, anyone who's making liquid, which would be, again, for open systems. And while it may be feasible for retailers to get licenses, retailer licenses for e-liquid, the problem is that starting July 1st, it will be impossible for an e-liquid company, whether in-state or out-of-state, to obtain a permit to manufacture liquid for use for selling in Indiana. And so that is really going to kill the industry. There will be no e-liquid industry starting July 1st in Indiana. It's really drastic. A lot of people don't realize it. There's a number of lawsuits happening. I have my colleagues are in Indiana today on January 7th, deposing the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission because our motion for summary judgment is due at the end of the month.
Excellent.
And so
Excellent.
we're in crime right now, and we need support to see this all the way through.
Well, that's excellent to hear. So again, for those of you who are listening right now, this is a war. This is a war where we have to be proactive here, and we have to put some common sense and some logic into the conversation. And we also have to overcome some of the negative propaganda and publicity that's out there. And that's something, of course, we talk about all the time here on Vape Radio. So, Azim, should someone want to get a hold of you at Keller and Heckman, give everyone your best contact information, sir.
Well, I think the easiest email to remember is esigattorney@khlaw.com. Or you can give me a call. I'm happy to give it my number, 202-434-4230.
That's most excellent. Well, Azim, thank you so much for obviously the amount of time that you gave us here. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go away. We're going to be back in just one moment. Well, I hope you got some value from these interviews as well as from the last show when we spoke with 5 Pawns. As I said in the recording, this battle is far from over, so it's time for everyone to get on board and get involved. In our next show, we're going to explore the epidemic of fraudulent vape space lawsuits and tell you how you can protect yourself. We're also going to share some new VapeMentors offerings, including the 2016 Vaping Industry Survival Guide. But before we leave, I want to make you an offer that you can't refuse. Would you like to get your product, service, or message in front of our targeted vaping audience? Vape Radio is the #1 vape radio show in the world with more than 1.1 million downloads and over 120,000 unique views a month. We were one of the top 10 business podcasts on Podbean and beat out more than 130,000 other shows in 2015. For just $750, you get your company integrated within 3 different shows. We're looking for 2 more advertisers to fill our spots. What about you? Contact Norm at VapeMentors.com. So that's it for show number 68. So until next time, vape on.